The first gunshot shattered the peaceful evening, ripping through the crisp lakeside air like a crack of thunder. My brain barely had time to register the shock before a searing pain exploded in my foot, knocking me backward onto the gravel with a thud that echoed in my skull. Blood pooled around me, warm and sticky, staining the earth as my breath came in ragged gasps. Through the haze of agony, I saw her, Karen, standing there, hands shaking, eyes wide and gleaming with an unsettling mix of rage and conviction. The same woman who had spent months terrorizing me over my so-called crimes against nature, the same neighbor who once berated me for eating a turkey sandwich on my porch, was now standing over me with a gun. She muttered something under her breath, her voice unsteady yet dripping with self-righteous fury. "You left me no choice," she whispered, knuckles white around the pistol grip. "I warned you. You refused to listen. You kept murdering them." Her gaze flickered to the still smoking grill beside my deck, where my dinner, 2 fresh fish caught from my own lake, had been sizzling just moments ago. I could barely comprehend it. The woman who preached peace, non-violence, and the sanctity of all living creatures had just put a bullet in me. And for what? For grilling dinner on my own property? For daring to fish in a lake that had belonged to my family for generations? The absurdity of it would have been almost comical if not for the excruciating pain radiating from my foot and the horrifying realization that she still had the gun aimed at me. This wasn't just another one of her ridiculous rants about animal rights or a protest against my barbaric lifestyle. This was something far worse. She had snapped. She had actually done it. The thing is, I should have seen it coming. I had ignored the warning signs for months, dismissed her increasingly erratic behavior as just another case of an overly enthusiastic activist with too much time on her hands. But Karen was never just enthusiastic, she was obsessed. It started small, almost laughably so. The first time I met her, she marched right up to me while I was unloading groceries from my truck and introduced herself with a disapproving frown. "I hope you don't eat meat," she said, skipping any pleasantries. "The smell of cooking flesh makes me physically ill." I remember standing there, momentarily stunned, a pack of steak in one hand and a bag of charcoal in the other. Yeah, I eat meat," I had replied, thinking it was just a weird opening line, some kind of awkward joke. It wasn't. Karen's expression had twisted into one of pure disgust, as if I had just admitted to kicking puppies for fun. "That's unfortunate," she said, her voice dripping with judgment. "I suggest you educate yourself. Meat is murder. Animals are sentient beings. You wouldn't eat your dog, would you?" I blinked at her, debating whether I should even engage. "I wouldn't grill my dog in the backyard if that's what you're asking," I said, trying to keep the mood light. Karen didn't find it funny. "I'll be keeping an eye on things," she warned before stomping away, clipboard in hand, as if she had just conducted some kind of official neighborhood inspection. I shrugged it off at the time, figuring she was just one of those overzealous activists who'd get bored and move on once she realized no one in town was interested in debating her philosophy every time they wanted to eat a burger. I couldn't have been more wrong. Within a week, Karen's presence became impossible to ignore. She didn't just disapprove of meat, she actively policed it. If she so much as smelled someone barbecuing in their yard, she'd march over uninvited and launch into a speech about the horrors of factory farming, the suffering of animals, and the moral depravity of carnivores. I heard from a neighbor that she once stood outside his house for over an hour with a protest sign while he was trying to cook dinner for his family. "Stop the bloodshed. Choose compassion," the sign read in bold red letters. At first, people found it annoying but tolerable. They'd roll their eyes, shut their doors, and wait for her to leave. But she never left. If anything, she escalated. She started hanging around the local grocery store, peering into people's carts, shaking her head in exaggerated disappointment when she spotted a pack of bacon or a carton of eggs. She even confronted the store manager, demanding they dedicate more shelf space to plant-based alternatives and remove the offensive meat displays near the entrance. The manager, to his credit, laughed her out of the store, but that only seemed to fuel her determination. As irritating as she was to the whole neighborhood, I had the misfortune of being her primary target. The reason? My lake. A few acres of private water nestled behind my house, passed down through generations, a place where I had fished with my grandfather as a kid, where my father had taught me how to cast a line. To me, it was more than just a fishing spot. It was home, history, tradition. To Karen, it was a crime scene. The first time she caught me fishing, she acted like I had personally drowned a baby seal in front of her. "What do you think you're doing?" she shrieked from the other side of the fence, her hands gripping the wooden slats so tightly her knuckles turned white. I turned to her, confused. Fishing?" Her face contorted in fury. "That's not fishing. That's kidnapping. You're stealing lives. Those fish have families. Do you even think about what they go through?" I stared at her, momentarily speechless. "They're fish, Karen. They have emotions," she howled. "They feel pain. They have dreams." That was the first time I realized just how deep her fanaticism ran. But it wouldn't be the last. What started as verbal harassment quickly turned into vandalism. I put up private property and no trespassing signs. They were torn down within days. I installed security cameras. They mysteriously got spray painted over. Then the real insanity began. Karen started feeding the lake. I woke up one morning to find piles of rotting vegetables and breadcrumbs floating near the shore, an attempt, I assumed, to free the fish from their carnivorous oppressor, me. I confronted her, of course, but she just smirked, arms crossed, as if she had just won some great ideological battle. "If you refuse to stop hurting them," she said, "then I will make sure they don't need you." At that point, I should have called the police, but part of me still thought she was just an overzealous activist playing harmless prank. Annoying? Yes. Criminal? Not yet. Then she started watching me. Every time I stepped outside with my fishing rod, I'd catch a glimpse of movement in her upstairs window, her silhouette, barely hidden behind the curtains, binoculars in hand. She didn't even try to hide it anymore. One evening, I walked outside carrying a bag of groceries, and before I even reached the porch, she was already there, standing at the property line. "I can smell it," she whispered. "You reek of death." At that moment, a chill crawled up my spine. This wasn't just activism. This wasn't even harassment anymore. This was something else. Something dangerous. And now, as I lay here, clutching my bleeding foot, my vision swimming with pain, I finally understood just how far she was willing to go. I had underestimated her. I had thought she was just an over-the-top nuisance. But Karen had never been harmless. She had been spiraling from the moment she moved in. I woke up in a haze of pain and confusion, the sterile scent of antiseptic burning my nostrils before my vision even fully returned. The steady beeping of medical monitors pulsed in the background, a rhythmic reminder that I was still alive. My foot throbbed in protest as I shifted slightly, sending a fresh wave of agony up my leg. It took me a moment to remember where I was, to piece together the fragments of what had happened. The gunshot, the gravel, the blood. Karen. The sheer insanity of it all slammed into me like a freight train, making my pulse spike as flashes of her unhinged face hovered in my mind. I wasn't just shot. I was shot by the world's most militant vegan, a woman who had spent months harassing me about the morality of fishing, who had gone from screaming about animal rights to pulling a trigger like it was the only logical next step. And now I was lying in a hospital bed, bandaged up, lucky to be alive, while she was probably sitting in a jail cell still convinced she was some kind of hero. The absurdity of it should have made me laugh, but there was nothing funny about knowing that my life had nearly ended because a neighbor had taken her moral crusade too far. The door creaked open, and I turned my head, expecting a nurse, but instead, I saw a familiar face. Officer Daniels, the same cop I had called a dozen times to complain about Karen's harassment, the same one who had always shrugged it off as neighborly disputes and told me to just ignore her. Now he looked distinctly uncomfortable, shifting his weight as he cleared his throat. "Well," he started, rubbing the back of his neck, "guess we should have taken your complaints a little more seriously, huh?" I stared at him, my face devoid of amusement. "You think—" The words came out hoarse, laced with exhaustion and frustration, but Daniels had the decency to at least look guilty. "She's in custody," he added quickly, as if that would somehow undo everything. "No bail. Judge saw the footage from one of your neighbor's security cameras. Open and shut case." He sighed, shaking his head. "Never seen anything like it. We deal with some crazy folks in this town, but this is next level." I exhaled sharply, pressing a hand to my forehead. The rage bubbling inside me was almost as overwhelming as the pain in my foot. "She shot me," I said slowly, as if he needed a reminder. "Because of fish." Daniels nodded grimly. "Yeah. And in the interrogation room? She's not even sorry. Says she had to do it. That you left her no choice." I felt my stomach turn, a sick, twisting sensation that had nothing to do with my injury. She still believed she was in the right. Even now, after all of this. Daniels hesitated before speaking again, his voice quieter this time. "She's been ranting non-stop about you. Says you're a butcher, a war criminal. Kept repeating that you forced her hand. That no one else would listen." He shifted uncomfortably. "She actually said she regrets not aiming higher." My blood ran cold. For a moment, the hospital room felt too small, the walls pressing in on me, suffocating. It wasn't just some act of passion, some reckless mistake. She had wanted to do worse. The thought of it made my skin crawl. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice strained. Daniels sighed, flipping through his notes. "DA's filing charges for attempted murder, illegal possession of a firearm, aggravated assault. She's not getting out anytime soon." He paused. "But I figured you should know. She asked for a lawyer. And when she got one, she told them she wants to plead insanity." A bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. Insanity. Of course. Because what else could she do? She had spent months terrorizing me, escalating from passive-aggressive comments to outright vandalism, from psychological harassment to actual violence, and now she wanted to claim she wasn't in control of her actions? "You buying it?" I asked. Daniels shook his head. "Hell no. She knew exactly what she was doing. Premeditation, the whole 9 yards. But a good lawyer might argue otherwise." He sighed. "Either way, she's off the streets for now. You're safe." Safe. The word felt hollow. I might have been lying in a hospital bed instead of a morgue, but the thought of going back to that house, of stepping foot near that lake again, made my stomach churn. Even if she was locked away, she had already won in a way. She had taken something from me, something I'd never get back. My peace, my sense of security in my own home. The days blurred together after that. Painkillers dulled the worst of the agony, but nothing could numb the lingering fear, the paranoia that lingered at the edges of my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake. My neighbors visited, some bringing food, others just stopping by to offer their support. The common sentiment among them was shock, disbelief. "We all knew she was nuts," one of them admitted, shaking his head. "But damn, we never thought she'd actually—" He trailed off, his eyes darting to my bandaged foot. No one wanted to finish that sentence. No one wanted to say what we were all thinking. That she could have killed me. That she had tried. And then, just when I thought the nightmare was finally over, the news broke. Karen had spoken to the press. Somehow, she had managed to spin the entire situation into a twisted version of reality where she wasn't the unhinged lunatic who shot an innocent man, but rather a misunderstood activist who had been driven to the edge by the cruelty of humanity. The headlines were nauseating. "Passionate vegan takes drastic action against animal cruelty." "Woman who shot neighbor claims self-defense for the fish." Radicalized or righteous? The debate over vegan vigilante justice. I read every article in stunned silence, my blood pressure rising with each ridiculous word. They were painting her as some kind of martyr, a woman who had been pushed too far by a world that refused to listen. No mention of the months of harassment, of the vandalism, of the stalking. No mention of the fact that she had fired a loaded gun at an unarmed man who was standing on his own property. No, instead, they framed it as some kind of tragic misunderstanding, a moment of desperation from a woman who had only wanted to save lives. I threw my phone across the room, watching as it hit the wall with a dull thud and slid to the floor. The anger in my chest felt like a wildfire, burning hotter than the pain in my foot. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Karen might have been sitting in a jail cell, but the world was already twisting the story, making her out to be something she wasn't. And worst of all, there were people buying it. People in the comment sections of articles and news reports praising her, calling her a hero, saying that I was the real villain. That I had deserved it. That maybe if I had just stopped fishing, stopped hurting the poor fish, none of this would have happened. I wanted to scream. To tell the world exactly who Karen was, what she had done, how this wasn't some noble act of defiance but the violent delusions of a woman who had lost all grip on reality. But I knew it wouldn't matter. People would believe what they wanted to believe. As I sat there, staring at my shattered phone on the floor, one thing became painfully clear. I wasn't just fighting Karen anymore. I was fighting the narrative. And whether I liked it or not, this wasn't just a neighbor dispute gone wrong. This had become something much bigger. Something I had never asked for. But I wasn't about to let her win. Not now. Not ever. I knew from the moment I left the hospital that my life would never be the same. The wound in my foot would heal eventually, the pain would fade, and the scars would just be another reminder of what had happened, but the damage Karen had done wasn't just physical. It was in my head, in the way I flinched every time I heard an unexpected noise, in the way I couldn't walk past my own window without looking out first to make sure no one was lurking on the other side. The worst part was that even with Karen locked up, her presence still loomed over me like a storm cloud that refused to move. I couldn't sleep without seeing her face, that wild, deranged look in her eyes, the way she had whispered that I left her no choice before pulling the trigger. The trial was set to begin in a few weeks, and I had already given my statement to the DA, but no matter how much they reassured me that this was an easy conviction, that Karen was going away for a long time, I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow, some way, she would find a way to ruin my life all over again. The media certainly wasn't helping. The narrative they had built around her had already taken on a life of its own, turning her from a violent, unstable extremist into some kind of misguided activist who had simply been pushed too far. Even after she nearly killed me, there were people defending her, calling her a warrior, a woman who had been forced to take drastic measures because no one would listen to her pleas. Some of the more unhinged supporters even started sending me messages online, calling me a murderer, a monster, saying I deserved what happened to me, that they wished she had aimed higher. It was insane, completely and utterly insane, but it was happening. And no matter how much I wanted to ignore it, to pretend like it didn't bother me, I couldn't. Because this wasn't just about Karen anymore. This had become something much bigger, and I was stuck in the middle of it whether I liked it or not. I spent most of my days at home, resting my foot, trying to recover, but no amount of painkillers could ease the growing anxiety that settled deep in my gut every time I looked out at the lake. It had always been my escape, my sanctuary, the one place where I felt at peace, but now it felt tainted, ruined by the memories of Karen screaming at me from across the fence, by the knowledge that she had been watching me, plotting against me, long before she ever pulled that trigger. My neighbors did their best to support me, but even they couldn't fully understand what it felt like to have your entire life turned upside down overnight. They had seen the crazy, sure, they had dealt with her ridiculous protests and self-righteous rants, but they hadn't been the ones in the crosshairs. They hadn't been the ones lying on the ground, bleeding, wondering if they were about to die over a couple of grilled fish. The worst part was knowing that if she ever got out, If somehow the justice system failed the way it so often did, I would never truly be safe again. The thought haunted me, dug into my mind like a parasite, refusing to let go. When the trial finally began, I forced myself to sit through every single day of it, even though every moment made my skin crawl. Karen, unsurprisingly, showed no remorse. If anything, she looked proud, sitting there with the same smug expression she had worn every time she lectured me about my supposed crimes against nature. Her lawyer tried to paint her as someone who had simply snapped under the weight of her convictions, that she had never intended to actually hurt me, that the gun had gone off by accident. It was complete and utter nonsense, and the prosecution tore it apart with ease, showing the jury the months of documented harassment, the vandalism, the trespassing, the threats, and of course, the footage of her standing over me, gun in hand, whispering about how I had forced her to do it. It should have been a slam dunk, an easy conviction, but still, I couldn't relax. Not when Karen had already proven just how far she was willing to go. Then, the moment came. The defense called Karen to the stand, and as soon as she opened her mouth, it was clear she wasn't going to play the remorseful victim. No, she was going to double down, just like she always did. "I had no choice," she said, voice trembling with fake emotion, eyes scanning the jury as if she expected them to nod along with her delusions. No one would listen. I tried everything. Protests, education, even pleading with him directly, but he refused to stop the slaughter. Every single day, more innocent lives were lost. The fish, the animals, all of them suffered while he laughed in my face. What was I supposed to do? Just stand by and watch? I acted out of necessity, out of desperation. And I would do it again if I had to. A murmur spread through the courtroom, some gasps, some whispers, but all I could do was stare at her in disbelief. She wasn't even trying to defend herself. She was admitting to everything, and yet, somehow, she still thought she was the hero in this story. The prosecutor wasted no time tearing her apart. "So, just to be clear," he said, voice dripping with controlled disdain, "you believe that shooting an unarmed man on his own property was justified? That this was, what, some kind of noble act?" Karen lifted her chin, eyes burning with defiance. "I believe," she said slowly, deliberately, "that sometimes drastic measures are required for the greater good." The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time, I saw something flicker in her lawyer's expression: panic. He knew she had just sealed her own fate. The verdict didn't take long. Guilty on all charges. The judge didn't hold back either, sentencing her to a lengthy prison term that ensured she wouldn't be terrorizing anyone for a long time. I should have felt relieved, I should have felt victorious, but all I felt was exhausted. As they led her out of the courtroom, she turned to look at me one last time, and for a split second, I saw something that sent an icy chill down my spine. A smile. A knowing, twisted little smile, like she knew something I didn't. Like she still believed she had one somehow. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild my life, to reclaim some sense of normalcy, but it was easier said than done. Even with Karen behind bars, the damage she had done lingered. My lake, my home, everything felt different now, like a crime scene I couldn't escape from. The media circus eventually died down, moving on to the next outrageous story, but every now and then, I would still get a message, an email, some unhinged comment from a stranger calling me a monster, a murderer, all because I had dared to fish in my own lake. It was a constant reminder that no matter what happened to Karen, there would always be others like her, people so consumed by their own warped sense of morality that they were willing to justify anything, even violence, in the name of their cause. One evening, as I sat on my porch, staring out at the water, I realized something. No matter what, I refused to let her take this from me. My peace, my home, my love for fishing, she had already taken enough, and I wasn't going to let her take any more. So I picked up my fishing rod, walked to the shore, and cast my line. The ripples spread out across the water, gentle and endless, and for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to peace. Karen might have tried to destroy my life, but in the end, she had failed. Because I was still here.